we have it documented.
I'm Would you look at Exhibit D5? I'm just going to back up a second, talking about Nicole Sedlock.
D5 is an interview, October 14th, 2015, typed up by Detective Reed Kais of Joe Sedlock.
Now, if you look at the last paragraph, that indicates that Nicole Sedlock had a photographic memory and would truthfully know things about, and it was an interview about this case, wasn't it?
Last paragraph of the last page?
Last paragraph of the last page.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, it was 3 years later before, 3 years plus, before Ms. Sedlock was interviewed.
Your Honor, objection has been answered.
You may answer, and it's simply a question that calls for a yes or no answer.
What was the question?
It was 3+ years later when Ms. Sedlock was interviewed.
Yes, that's correct.
And just to clarify, Jeremiah Laird, when you said he died in the fall, you're talking fall 2018?
I'm not sure when he died. I recall when it happened, but when, I'm not sure.
Now, Mr. Laird's name came up a number of times in the course of this investigation, didn't it?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And he was only interviewed once in November of 2015?
To my knowledge, I think that's correct.
Let me just detour just a little bit. Do you know the name Jerry Pyburn?
Yes, I do.
You did an interview with Mr. Pyburn asking if there was any reason his DNA would be at the crime scene?
I conducted an interview of Mr. Pyburn for multiple different reasons, not specifically for that. And I'm sure I would have asked him that. That would have been in my standard line of questioning.
And you're talking about with regard to the Carter, with the Shirley Carter homicide, if there was any reason his DNA would be at that crime scene, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there any report other than the report of your interview with Jerry Pyburn indicating why and how you came to him to interview him?
Once the defense starts putting on their line of potential suspects of a burglary gone bad, Mr. Pyburn was known to law enforcement because he was actually a burglar many years ago in Marion County where a shooting took place and somebody was shot and harmed. And Mr. Pyburn had been recently released from prison just prior to the homicide of Shirley Carter. When that information became aware to me, he's a suspect at that point. I want to know where he's at. did he just get out of prison, and did he just go do something that he had already been convicted of? So yeah, I immediately got onto him and ruled him out as a suspect.
Well, okay, when you say immediately got on him, that was April 2018?
I'm not sure of the date. But when it came to my attention, that was something that actually carried weight. All these other individuals didn't carry any weight with us because this is an evidence-based investigation. And all these names I've
Objection,
talked
Your Honor,
about,
this is becoming narrative. I think the question was, that was April 2018.
I think he's answered the question. You may ask another question.
Well, if that's your criteria, John Followell and Joel Followell were known to be involved in a number of burglaries, weren't they?
they have been, but they aren't violent individuals. That's not in their nature or character that I felt. And I didn't fit, that did not fit their MO.
Do you have reports of them being involved in fights?
With each other. They are brothers of close age and close brothers, and they would get into fights with each other a lot. But at that point, it was never known that either one of them had been violent towards anyone else.
So my initial question that started this all was, do you have a report that indicates why you talked with Mr. Pyburn? I think you explained why. Is that in any report?
There's a whole nother case done on that incident, shooting burglary incident, and it came to light. I learned about this was before I was in the major crime unit, and so once I learned that we have a similar circumstances here potentially.
Your Honor, I'm going to say objection non-responsive. My question is if this is in a report.
Is it in a report?
Yes, it is in a whole separate report.
Is it in a report that's part of the Carter homicide investigation?
I believe it's referenced in my interview with him.
Okay. So, to be clear, Mr. Pyburn is only referenced in Mr. Pyburn's interview.
To my knowledge, yes.
Now, when you said that the Followells had no history of violence except against each other, did you actually look at their history?
I looked at their criminal history in great detail.
And are you saying that there are no convictions for any violent offenses for either one of them?
I don't remember what it is, but at the time the information we had was they're not violent towards anybody else.
So, let's see. Jordan Durham, you became aware of Jordan Durham in May of 2016 in an interview with Brad Calder.
That's correct.
She was interviewed 2.5 years later in January 2019.
That's correct.
Rory Pearson, well, we talked about that yesterday. You said there are reports, or there were interviews, but they may not be reported. Is that correct?
I refer back to Detective Kais on that. He conducted those.
So Shayna Flesher, you became aware of in November of 2015 from Sean Girdham Sr.
That's correct.
She wasn't interviewed until April of 2018.
That's correct.
Taylor Marshall was also listed in November of 2015.
That's quite possible.
At some point recently, Mr. Marshall's been interviewed.
What's his first name?
Taylor,
Yes, I believe that's correct.
and I'm sorry, Ms. Marshall, is that correct?
Who are we referring to?
Taylor Marshall.
I believe that's correct.
And have you seen a report for that interview?
I've seen hundreds and hundreds of reports that did not have strong merit on my behalf. If you could refer it back to me, I'll take a look at
Are
it.
you aware of a report involving Taylor Marshall?
I'm not.
And I'm just going to step back and talk one more thing about the gun. When Todd Farver contacted law enforcement in spring 2016, he gave a name and said Ray Cecil would know about the gun. Is that correct?
I know he gives us the name. I'm not sure who the name is, but that is very possible.
Well, that's tab 11 if you want to look at it. Okay. Oh.
Tab 11 is an email that Todd Farver calls in and gives information that there is a gun in the murder house stashed at a White House on the corner of Attica and Marion in Knoxville. 113.5 was either 1205 or 1207 East Marion. Only White House there, right behind Casey's. He said one of the follower wallets was left at the Carter property and someone picked it up and removed it. And that is an email dated June 6th of 2016.
And actually, a follow-up says that it was, that one of the Followell wallets was left at the property where the gun was at 1207 Marion, correct?
I don't see that.
Well, once there was communication with Todd Farver, that's what Todd Farver told you, correct?
Todd Farver's told us multiple stories to benefit his criminal process, and based on the evidence-based investigation.
Your
that was
Honor,
conducted-
again, I'm going to ask that the witness be instructed to answer the question.
I think he's answered your question. Please ask another.
Actually, Your Honor, I don't know if he had answered the question just of that Todd Farver told you that he meant that the wallet was left at the...
Why don't you re-ask your question?
Todd Farver told you that the wallet was left at the home where the gun was left, not at the Carter residence, didn't he? Once he clarified.
Where does he clarify that? I did not interview Mr. Farver until there's a proffer agreement while he was going to federal prison.
And it was in that interview that he made that clarification, correct?
I would have to go back and review that. I don't remember that aspect of it.
Now, over the course of these many interviews, there are some details that are clearly incorrect, aren't there?
I want to have a very clear record of everything's correct, so if there's anything that's not correct, I want to know that so we can correct that and make sure that the jury has all the facts in this case.
Let me rephrase. I'm not talking about your reports. I'm saying we've talked about a lot of names. I've gone through probably 20 different names when we've been talking. First of all, there are a lot more reports than what we've just gone over, aren't there?
Hundreds of reports, hundreds of interviews.
And some of those are people who just say, I've heard from someone, or I've heard a rumor. Some are clearly just those, third-hand reports, right?
There's lots of information that comes forward to us that do not meet the evidence that we know of. So if they provide us information that the male that was stabbed 30 times in the back, and that person, Joe Sedlock, he did it, he told me he did it, that doesn't meet the evidence-based investigation that was conducted. We know that it was a female, we know it was Shirley Carter, and we know she was shot 2 times. So if somebody's
Your
telling
Honor,
us,
again,
Answering your question, Ms. Branstad, you may ask another question.
Your Honor, if that's the case, could the witness be afforded the opportunity to complete a statement?
I think he had already answered her question earlier in his response.
Well-
Please ask another question.
I just want to clarify. Well, I'll do this. There are a number of things that vary in these reports. So there are some people who give information that's clearly incorrect, aren't there?
yes, I think that's what all of this is, incorrect.
Okay. I'm going to object to this witness's answer as argumentative and non-responsive again.
Overruled.
Agent Ludwick,
Yes, ma'am.
many, many people implicate Joe Sedlock, John Followell, and Joe Followell, correct?
Their names come up by multiple individuals. I'm not going to define many, maybe fourth many, but their names are brought up, and I feel that we looked at Joel and John Followell, Matt Kamerick, and the evidence.
Your Honor,
I think the witness has answered the question. Ask another question, please.
at least a dozen of those people say that it was a burglary gone wrong, correct?
I'm not sure how many people, but yeah, burglary gone wrong was something that we knew by noon on the day of the homicide was going around the small community.
Do you have any reports that state that?
I believe it's in my report, yes. There's multiple interviews that were conducted.
Can you direct me to what report indicates that?
I think the neighborhood canvas section would make it very clear that that the rumors going around right away in Marion County.
I'm going to ask you specifically, I'm going to ask you not to keep generalizing. Can you name any report, one single report, from June 19th, 2015, that says there's a rumor that it was a burglary gone bad?
I believe in section 4 there's several
Well,
interviews and
I'll take you
information.
through section 4. You talk with a lot of neighbors, is that correct?
I don't, but
Law enforcement does.
law enforcement does, yes.
And there are individuals, multiple individuals, who say that they saw a white truck in the neighborhood, correct?
That's correct, and we did track that down.
There are multiple individuals who say that they saw, well, individuals who appeared out of place within the days before.
We had a report of one individual that we tracked back and determined who he was and why he was in the area.
Who's that?
That's the individual that was walking across the state of Iowa, and the missing dogs had followed him. Ms. Monica, Friday, he was walking on the highway and pushing this buggy type carriage, and stray dogs started to follow him. So he gets into Pleasantville the day prior to. So
He's answering your question, counsel.
Your Honor, this was a question that called for a name, and I think every question is becoming narrative at this point. But, so I would ask that the witness be instructed to answer the question.
Well, I think he was responding with a description as opposed to a name.
Okay.
Ask another question.
David Johnson said that he, oh, no, that was David Johnson. There was at least one neighbor who said that she could identify individuals in a vehicle. Is that correct?
yes, there was a neighbor that brought in some detailed notes that she wrote. I'd have to refer back to those notes, but she was quite descriptive of, as I recall, it was kind of kids hell raising on gravel roads.
Are these the type of reports that you're talking about indicating it was a burglary gone bad?
No, ma'am. She had specific information regarding a vehicle that she wanted law enforcement to know about.
Is there something I can hand you that would help you come up with where and when you say on June 15th anyone said it was a burglary gone bad?
I'm confident there's interviews conducted in my report that indicate that.
Can you give any names or types or any description to those reports?
Not off my head, no.
Is it possible there is no such report?
It's possible, but highly unlikely.
Do you have your report available to you here?
I do, yes.
Let's come back to that. And with regard to the charges against Jason Carter, you've received some reports from other individuals that are not consistent. Is that correct?
I don't understand your question.
Well, one person reported that Sheriff Jason Sandholt and Jason Carter were involved in a sex ring. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
One person reported that Sheriff Sandholt was hiding the weapon for Jason Carter.
I believe we had heard that at one point, yes.
Now, Lynette Castillo has provided reports to you, is that correct?
She's provided lots of information to us, but I'm not sure in a report form.
Okay. Information. Now, Lynette Castillo is Bill Carter's live-in companion, correct?
Jack, may we approach?
You may. Please ask another question, counsel.
At one point, you received a report that there was a shoe in the burn barrel. Is that correct?
Yes, there was information that there's a shoe that was burning in the burn barrel.
And the implication was that Jason Carter had tried to burn his shoes to cover up his involvement in this case.
I'm not sure what the implication was, but
Well, it was alleged that they were Jason Carter's shoes, correct?
I don't recall that.
And let me just turn to let me direct you to your deposition, volume 2, that's in front of you, page 52.
I have 4. Which one are we talking about?
Volume 2, page 52.
Your Honor, for the record, I'm going to object. The witness has not provided a statement, has not indicated he needs his recollection refreshed. These aren't exhibits that are in the record. Simply pointing a witness they've called in their case in chief to look at a document's improper.
I concur.
Well, let me just clarify. You did at some point deal with a concern that Jason Carter wore different shoes and then burned them in the burn pile. Is that correct?
When I arrived on the crime scene that morning, or that afternoon, early afternoon, I noticed that the burn barrel was burning, and that caught my attention. I go over there right away, and it's hot enough that I can't dig through there to see what's burning. There was information later in our crime lab. I instructed them, I want that burn barrel gone through. I want it sifted, so that we can see the layers, what was burning when. And I want the multiple different layers. At one point in a photograph, you can argue that there is a shoe, a burnt shoe, but as I recall, it did not appear to be a man's shoe. And I guess I personally was not, I did not feel that Jason Carter burned his shoes in the burn barrel that day. That's what
Okay.
I recall.
So to clarify, you didn't find any evidence that there was a burn, that anyone had burned their shoes in the burn pile that day, correct?
And I recall seeing a photograph, and I don't remember at what point it got my attention, but it got my attention somehow. And I looked at it, and I just didn't put a lot of weight into that is Jason Carter's shoes.
In this case, clothing could have been collected and checked for gunshot residue, blowback, or any type of biological material, correct?
Yeah, and that's something that we want to do right away on any shooting incident. In this case, definitely a homicide. And that lead was assigned out. Unfortunately, by the time I realized that the lead wasn't completed, it was the next day. So that was not completed.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm handing you an item marked as Exhibit AC. What
Yes,
is
ma'am.
AC?
AC, we did a search warrant on Jason Carter's home residence and property in rural Pleasantville or rural Knoxville on July 7th, 2015. And during that search warrant of his house, we've located a Ziploc bag in his bedroom on his dresser, or his wife's dresser, a dresser in the bedroom. And in that Ziploc bag had a T-shirt that appears to be one similar to the one that Jason Carter wore that morning to Casey's in Pleasantville when he got his donut and water. Also, he appears to be the same shirt that he wore on the video in Cargill, and with that he had on at the time of law enforcement arrival to the crime scene on the day of the homicide. And also in that Ziploc bags were there multiple receipts. Multiple receipts that he may purchase the gasoline that he never told us about at Casey's in Pleasantville that morning, along with his donut and water.
So when you arrived at the house, you didn't announce you were going to do a search warrant, did you?
No, we generally do not announce that. That's something we want to keep quiet.
And the clothing and the receipts were already in the bag when you arrived, correct?
That's correct, they were.
And are they as shown in Exhibit AC?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, I offer Exhibit AC.
No objection.
Exhibit AC is admitted.
You did seize those clothes and those receipts, correct?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And you never did have the shirt tested for gunshot residue or blowback or any biological material, correct?
I would have to refer, we sent it to the lab. I recall it went to the lab. It was photographed. And I probably would not have done it because at that point in time it had gone by. He's in a sealed Ziploc bag. Bacteria could have started growing in it. And I found it highly unlikely that with a 270 there would be blowback from Shirley Carter on his clothing.
Well, originally, you stated that you wished you had taken the clothing so you could do a test for gunshot residue, blowback, or biological material, right?
I wish we would have taken the clothing. I mean, that was a mistake that I wish we had made sure we had so that the defense didn't have that argument here in the courtroom. Would I have done it? I may or may not have. I would have referred back to the criminalist. If the criminalist felt that it's possible or probable, if it's possible that there could be blowback, I would have done that. We would took those resources and had that done. But if I'm learning from our experts saying this is the weapon used, this is the range that is involved, and if they would have told me that gases from the rifle would prevent that blowback, then I may have chosen not to do that.
Okay. Was that a long way of saying, no, I didn't do those tests?
I did not do those. Well, I don't recall. I remember the shirt being sent to the lab. What the lab did with it specifically, I don't recall. I'd go back to the lab reports.
So you may or may not have made requests for those tests.
If I did, it'd be in the lab section of my report.
And there'd be a report one way or another, no matter how those tests concluded, correct?
That is correct.
Within your reports, you also indicate you submitted a female DNA profile for analysis. Do you know what that's referring to?
I'm assuming it would be Shirley Carter's DNA. We don't have that on file, is my guess. That you're referring to.
Now, over the course of this case, you've made some assumptions, haven't you?
I would say educated assumptions, yes.
Well, in March 2016, you stated that you believed that Jason Carter was planning to shoot his wife and his children and commit suicide.
We had very strong and I felt valid concerns early on in the investigation, especially during the summer of 2015. We felt very strongly that Chase Carter had information that he knew about.
Objection, that non-responsive.
Well, I think he's trying to answer your question, counsel. Why don't you ask another question?
Well, actually, let me just say, I'm sorry I interrupted you because you did not have any report from anyone that Jason Carter had ever said anything that indicated he had some intention to shoot his children and his wife and commit suicide, did you?
Other than signs telling us that his life was, as he knew it, was coming down, and we did not want anyone else harmed in this case. We didn't want any innocent individuals charged with any crimes, and I was concerned for the welfare and life of Chase and McKenna and his wife Shelley.
My question was, no one told you that Jason Carter said anything indicating some intention to shoot his wife, his children, and commit suicide.
That's correct, I believe.
You didn't have any writings where Jason Carter had written something that looked like a suicide note or anything that was written that had any indication of some intent to shoot his wife, his children, and commit suicide, did you?
That's correct.
You didn't have any reports of Jason Carter emoting wildly anywhere at any
had-
point in March of 2016, did you?
He had a lot of odd behaviors that weren't adding up to me.
Okay. None of these included screaming, melting down, or anything where he had a communication with someone else that indicated any of this in January, February, or March of 2016.
I believe you're correct, yes.
But you told more than one person you believed that was Jason Carter's intent.
I believe it was my concern. We were concerned about it. I don't know the word intent was used, but it definitely was my concern along with multiple different other law enforcement officials.
Well, you said that you believed that Jason Carter was planning to shoot his wife, his children, and commit suicide.
I don't recall that.
And in fact, what you were, well,
Was
Skip
that in
that.
an email?
you gave a deposition in July of 2018 where you discussed that, didn't you?
I'm sure I did. That was a very strong concern we had for a long period of time.
You also gave testimony in a preliminary hearing in December of 2017, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
At that time, you were asked repeatedly who the possible suspects in this case had been, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
You named Mike McDonald, Paul Rehard, Billy Carter Sr., Billy Carter Jr., Jana Lane, Jason Carter, Shelley
For the
Carter.
record, objection for the same grounds as before.
Sustained.
Well, you didn't name John Followell, Joel Followell, or Joe Sedlock at that time, did you?
I don't recall.
Your preliminary hearing transcript is in front of you. Will you take a look and see if it's in there at any place?
It is on record, so whatever the record reflects, I would agree that that's what I said.
The jury won't be provided with that, so if you take a look.
What page should I look at, ma'am?
Starting at page 39. Or actually, it's starting at page 38.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this might be a good time for us to take a recess for the morning. We will let the witness look through the testimony he has been directed to. During this recess, please remember the previous admonitions I've given to you. Keep an open mind. You've not heard all of the evidence. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone. We will be at recess for about 15 minutes.